Hi, everybody. I love seeing how many people I know in the attendees section. Some of you may know some acronyms I'm not aware of, so don't worry. At the end of this presentation, I'm going to say, give us your favorite acronyms. And so we will read them from the Q&A or from the chat. But I just want to give a little bit of context here. So if you don't know me, I'm the executive director of LAAC, Salena Copeland. I use she, her pronouns. And I have been in the legal aid community since 2008. And before that, I did, of course, law school, community law clinics. And our community loves acronyms because they're quick. And there's no reason, for example, to spell out something quite long when we all know what we're talking about. I think the problem is really obvious that we don't all know what we're talking about. And it's really helpful when we occasionally will kind of reflect back, okay, why are we using that acronym? Is it really that much of a shorthand? And then when you're in groups, especially with newer staff or with law students or in community partnerships, really being aware of the acronyms you use and why, making sure that we're bringing people in the work instead of using acronyms that could potentially shut people out. So I have called this, what the heck does QLSP mean? Because that is probably one of the more frequently used acronyms. And I realize some of you may not know that you are a QLSP. So I have slides with a lot of fun or confusing acronyms on there. Feel free to ask during Q&A. And at one point, Yoselina will probably tell me to stop talking. She'll ask some questions, but there's plenty of time for questions at the end as well. And I will not be monitoring chat because I will mess up my own slide presentation. So moving to the first slide, this is just an overview so you know how you're going to spend the next 30 or so minutes with me. I will tell you who LAAC is. I will also go first into the basics of IOLTA. We'll talk a little bit about the larger legal aid community, other stakeholders, how funding works generally from some of our largest sources of funding in California in particular. And then also I have a slide at the end that's just random acronyms. So first acronym, LAAC. LAAC is the Legal Aid Association of California. So we say LAAC, we've said LAAC for a very long time. None of us care if you call us LAAC, but we go by LAAC. And our tag is Legal Aid Fights for Justice, and we fight for you. So who is LAAC and why are you spending time with me right now? So we were founded in 1983 with the passage of our state's IOLTA statute. Legal aid leaders at the time realized they needed an entity similar to NLADA to represent their interests before the state bar and before the legislature. They needed a coordinating hub for our community to provide training and connect advocates with each other. So you see already, we've got 3 acronyms on the first slide. And this is the slide I use when I do orientation for our staff. And I realize, from day one, I'm already into acronyms. So we'll be going over these 3 acronyms and others today. So for those of you who went to law school, I always like to go back about thinking about the larger public interest community. So when you're in law school or when you're doing social justice work and as an undergrad or as a community worker, the public interest community is quite broad. It includes organizations like the ACLU. It includes organizations that provide immigration legal services. It includes organizations like MALDEF, or even organizations that do environmental work. And that's the much larger community. But we really focus on the IOLTA community. So that's the legal services community here in California. And in California, there are 93 organizations that provide services directly to clients. And there are 22 support centers. I'm touching on a few acronyms now. Don't worry, I will talk to you more about them later. But that's the context. Ooh, they flash. That's the context of the larger public interest community that we all work in now. LAAC was founded in 1983 to serve the IOLTA community in particular. So that's where we focus a lot of our work. But there we go. the animation's a little wonky right now. But what we also do is work with other stakeholders, including the State Bar of California, the legislature here in California, and the California court system. And we also work with law schools and the private bar. Sorry, this animation is messed up. And we also work, of course, with funders for legal aid and with state agencies. And in case you were asking in the chat or in Q&A, we will share all these slides after the fact, along with a list of all the acronyms. So IOLTA basics. So what is IOLTA? IOLTA is defined in California Business and Profession Code 6210 and etc. So that is where the system was created to pull, I guess, PULL and POOL, the interest on lawyer trust accounts that individual attorneys and law firms may hold for clients where there is not enough interest that you would open up a single client trust account. So you know that if you're holding $1 million for a client for a settlement agreement, then you would have an individual trust account for that client, and any interest that was earned on that amount, that would go to the client. But if you're holding a very small amount of money, or if you're holding it just overnight before you write a check, from the settlement to the client, attorneys are not in the practice of opening up an individual client account. And what was happening before 1981 is that attorneys would be able to keep the interest on that. So attorneys were able to profit off of the interest on the funds that they were holding for their clients. And so this was created by our legislature in 1981 to POOL all of that revenue and use it for the greater good of the community. It has been challenged multiple times. It's gone even up all the way to our Supreme Court, and it has been found to be not a taking. So IOLTA account's good, but we're going to do a little side quest, because why did we create IOLTA? Why was it necessary? So I'm going to go back just a teeny bit, and I promise this is my only history trip. We are planning a legal aid history webinar in the future, but I think this context is really important, and it's also full of acronyms. So in 1965, the Office of Economic Opportunity created the Legal Services Program. That's a precursor to what's now the Legal Services Corporation. But back in 1965, there was a way to fund legal services across our country through the OEO. And in the late 1960s, Governor Reagan of California received a memo that talked about out-of-control lawyers, including one attorney from legal aid who used the F word in front of high school students. So there was a very long report about these out-of-control legal aid attorneys that needed to be pulled under control. And Governor Reagan at the time attempted to completely defund CRLA, another acronym, California Rural Legal Assistance, in 1970. It was a failed attempt, but a lot of that set the tone of what was happening in the late 1960s and the early 1970s. The Legal Services Corporation was founded. It is not a government or federal agency. It is a way of distributing funding from Congress to the states for free legal services. So LSC is an acronym that a lot of us use all the time. LSC funded organizations are in every single state. In California, we have 11 LSC funded organizations, and that funding stream started in 1974. But Ronald Reagan was elected president in 1980. So this was a time in which a lot of states understood that this federal funding for legal aid could be a target. And that's true. Reagan attempted to completely defund LSC several times. And so states, I think that Florida may have been the first, but I think Australia and Canada may have even done it before the United States, looking at IOLTA as a way to fund free legal services. So that's the end of our time machine side quest. We are back to present, I guess not quite present day, we're back to the 80s. So I wanted just to show you these two things that are defined in the statute that are very important to the work we do now. So in Cal BMP 6213, there's two major ways that you can receive state funding distributed through IOLTA. You are either a qualified legal services project, that's QLSP, qualified legal services project, and that is largely, you think of the direct services providers or some law school clinics can be a QLSP, or you're a qualified support center. And support centers really are the organizations that are the backbone. They provide technical assistance, training, and advocacy. Some of you may work at support centers. If you're at a QLSP, you'll know some of the larger support centers like Western Center on Law and Poverty, National Housing Law Project. So there are support centers that receive IOLTA funding specifically to support the legal aid community. So this is the statute. So the QLSP, I'm bringing all these acronyms back together. QLSP think of them as the direct services programs. Think of them as field programs. Think of them as organizations that their focus is direct services to individuals, but they also may do impact work and policy work, but it's really to individual clients for the benefit of individual clients, whereas support centers really focus on support to the community of attorneys. Another term that you may hear is LSO. It's a little bit more of an informal term for legal services organization, which encompasses both QLSPs and support centers. And it's not just IOLTA funded. So you may hear a funder talk about LSOs, and that is a broader community of those legal services organizations, whether or not they receive IOLTA and Equal Access Fund dollars. So EAF is another acronym. EAF was created in 1999 by our then Chief Justice, Ron George. He saw a need to fund legal aid. And I'm not taking another side quest, I promise. But in the 1990s, there were several restrictions placed on federal funding. We had a Republican-led Congress that was placing a lot of restrictions, not only on what legal aid organizations could do with their federal dollars, but what they could do at all as a condition of accepting those federal dollars. And we still had a huge justice gap of people not able to access legal services. So at the time, our Chief Justice, Ron George, and a couple other Chief Justices since then have really seen access to justice as a core commitment of the courts. So Chief Justice Ron George put $10 million in our state budget through the court's budget for Equal Access Fund. So I'll talk a little bit more about how IOLTA is distributed and how Equal Access Fund is distributed later in this presentation, but I just want to flag those as these are the big acronyms that you'll hear a lot. So the larger legal aid community, and I put NLADA in a bigger font because they're the big ones. So we were founded to be like NLADA. And when I'm meeting with people in other states, I say, we're like NLADA, but we're California and no public defenders. So NLADA is the National Legal Aid and Defenders Association. They're over 100 years old. They really coordinate legal aid organizations across our country. And their focus is really looking at federal issues that impact legal aid and also impact public defenders. So we work really closely with them. I hope that you know NLADA. They've got great resources, great trainings, and they have a conference they put on every year called EJC, Equal Justice Conference, also put on by ABA, American Bar Association. So NLADA and ABA co-host the EJC, Equal Justice Conference, every year. This year, it's actually in San Francisco. So in May of this year, we'll be in San Francisco. If you aren't aware of the Equal Justice Conference, I really encourage you to check out the agenda. I love going to it every year. It's a great way to connect with other people. So another acronym here, part of the larger legal aid community, is the SCLAID, Standing Committee on Legal Aid and Indigent Defense. That is a committee of the ABA. So that is a committee of people nationally who are interested in legal aid issues and in indigent defense issues. And so they will put forward things like minimum standards or guidelines that are other states can follow if they're looking for minimum guidance. But if you hear those terms, those are these three organizations, NLADA, ABA, and SCLAID, those are all national organizing efforts. SLSP is one that we use frequently. That is Senior Legal Service Provider. And those are for organizations here in California that receive, more acronyms, Older Americans Act grants under Title 3B. So OAA, Senior Legal Services Providers receive funding specifically targeted to serve seniors. And that's why in your IOLTA income eligibility, you can be eligible for IOLTA services based on income. You could be eligible for IOLTA services based on if you are eligible for Older Americans Act funding, or you could be eligible for IOLTA services based on certain developmental disabilities. And so those are referenced in the IOLTA statute. Another core or important acronym is MIE. It used to be Management and Information Exchange. It's now Management, Innovation, and Excellence in Legal Aid. They produce a journal that's really fantastic. I'm sure I have a ton of them near me in my stack of things to read. Yes, I do. And also I'll grab it just to show you. So they put a paper journal out, and it has really great topics around about learning, about a lot of stuff of what it means to be a millennial attorney. Millennials are making their mark on legal aid. So there's just a lot of articles in here that are really fantastic. They also put on great training. So if you are not a member of MIE, or if your organization's not a member, you basically just subscribe to it and you get this great journal. So those are the acronyms from the larger legal aid community. Now here's our list of other stakeholders. And I promise after this, I'm going to put all of these in like a list and we're going to share it. But I wanted to kind of explain them because I think helping to explain what they mean is better than just, A2J means this. A2J, sometimes ATJ means just access to justice. So I often hear this acronym used by judges or justices when they're talking about how they're working on access to justice issues. They'll say A2J or ATJ, and that's what they're working on. Um, CalATJ is the California Access to Justice Commission. That is a commission here in California. A lot of states have an Access to Justice Commission. Here in California, it's a staffed commission and they do a lot of grants. And so your organization may actually receive grants from CalATJ. CalATJ has a really great website. One of my favorite things about their website is for every past grantee, cycle, they have descriptions of all the grantees that were selected and a description of their applications. And so if you, for example, are thinking about a technology change, you can go and look at CalATJ's past grantees for the innovation and infrastructure grants and figure out what other organizations are doing similar work. So I love their website for that reason. LSFN is a legal services funders network. They are based here in the Bay Area, and they are a collaboration of funders who prioritize funding for legal aid as part of their strategy, whether it's to bring about larger social justice goals, whether it's to help children. LSFN is the way that those entities work with each other. It's largely private foundations, but it also includes some governmental entities that fund legal aid. And they have the LSFN Fellows. Your organization may have an LSFN fellow. Those are postgraduate fellowships that begin I think they begin in June of each year post-graduation. It's a part-time fellowship to allow people to study for the bar exam and take the bar exam while having something on their resume and having some experience in legal aid while they're awaiting their bar exam results. So LSFN is a key partner and stakeholder. LSTFC, Legal Services Trust Fund Commission. Sometimes people say TFC, Trust Fund Commission. It depends on how long you've been doing this, whether you say LSTFC or TFC. The Legal Services Trust Fund Commission is an entity actually now codified in statute that they are the entity that make funding decisions for the legal aid community on key grants like IOLTA, Equal Access Fund, HP grants in the past, CalHFA grants in right now ongoing. And so they are a commission of several individuals who are appointed by various entities. Their meetings are public. We go to every single meeting and every single subcommittee meeting. And right now, the Legal Services Trust Fund Commission includes a large number of former legal aid staff. And so they and a lot of other members of the Trust Fund Commission are on your boards as well. So they really have a deep commitment to the work and they're making the funding decisions. AOC is something that we don't use that much anymore, but I'm putting it here because you may hear it from somebody. AOC is the Administrative Office of the Courts. It's a term that's still frequently used in other states, but here in California, our AOC, which is like the staff of our larger judicial council, we now call the staff the judicial council staff. So you may hear someone say AOC, and that means the staff of the judicial council. BOT, formerly known as the BOG, the Board of Trustees of the State Bar of California was renamed, I don't know, 5 years ago or so. It used to be the Board of Governors, is now the Board of Trustees. And that was a really intentional renaming to try to pull away some of the politicalness of the State Bar leadership and to make it more trustees of the public protection mission of the bar. So you may hear people talk about the BOT meeting coming up. That's the Board of Trustees. CDSS is a California Department of Social Services. Many of you may have CDSS grants, and it is one of the major government agencies funding legal aid outside of course, the State Bar. Department of Finance is the state agency that basically analyzes legislation to see how it impacts the budget. They do a lot of financial analysis. They do a lot of projections and reports. The Department of Finance also will distribute funds to other agencies. And so we talk a lot about Department of Finance because they may have questions about the work that you're doing and ensuring that you're reporting everything you need to do for the Department of Finance to know how the work has been funded. And I threw in NLG, National Lawyers Guild, because many of you, especially if you went to law school, may have been active in the National Lawyers Guild. There are chapters across the country and across our state. And so you may be attending meetings of various other bar associations. And so I put NLG as one example, but there are a lot of local bar associations that you could belong to. So if you hear something like LACBA, that's Los Angeles County Bar Association, just when you hear those acronyms, ask about them because there's a lot of local ones. And here's random acronyms. So this is going to be a lot. Don't worry, I've got a list, and we'll take questions too. But I wanted to explain a few of these. I'm going to start on the right side because those are the easy ones. A lot of organizations are known by their shorthands: LISNIC, LAFLA, CRLA, NHLP, ICLC, PILP. So when you see those names, feel free to ask which organization you're talking about, because Legal Services of Northern California, we all call them LISNIC. Legal Aid Foundation of Los Angeles, everybody calls them LAFLA. California Rural Legal Assistance, we call them CRLA. National Housing Law Project, Inner City Law Center, Public Interest Law Project. Some organizations may go by interchangeably by the acronyms or a short term, like Inner City Law Center. Sometimes we say Inner City, or some organizations will call themselves the Law Center when they're local. So if you see an acronym, ask about the acronym, and also ask what's the preferred term if you're talking with community partners, because in your local community, you may be called something a little bit different than what we call you in the statewide coordination work. So going back to the left side, the random acronyms, LRAP, Loan Repayment Assistance Programs. I wanted to flag that there are several different types of LRAPs. For those of you who went to law school and have law school debt, you are probably more aware of this than others. But you could have a loan repayment assistance from your law school. You could have loan repayment assistance from your employer. You could have loan repayment assistance from an outside entity as well. So LRAP is any form of loan repayment assistance that helps you pay your loans while you have educational debt. PSLF, Public Service Loan Forgiveness, is different. Public Service Loan Forgiveness is forgiveness of your loans at the remaining loan balance if you follow certain requirements. If you know you're in the Public Service Loan Forgiveness program, hopefully you're looking at all the resources, you're following what Department of Education is telling you to do. But PSLF is loan forgiveness, not loan payment. And I wanted to also call attention to PIALR, which I usually call this like PLR, which is not, it's like messing up the acronym, but PIALR is just too much of a mouthful. This is state loan repayment. So this is a new program. This was actually created back, I want to say in maybe 2007 by Assemblymember Hertzberg. He's since went to the Senate, but he created this program as a way to help provide public interest attorney loan repayment assistance. So what this is allowing a small amount of funding to help a small amount of attorneys. And this is a competitive funding stream. I believe that they currently fund about 40 attorneys statewide. I received notice that hopefully we'll be able to fund 100 new attorneys next year, but it is a way to help with loan forgiveness while you still have educational debt. Other random acronyms: VOCA, Victims of Crime Act. That is federal funding that flows from federal agencies to California that goes, now in California, it goes through CalOES, California Office of Emergency Services, to direct grants for organizations to help people. So if you have a VOCA grant, you know it, but that is a federal funding stream that flows to California. You'll also hear about the Justice Gap Fund. The Justice Gap is a term that we use in the community to say the gap between people who need legal help and are not able to be served, largely because of lack of resources in our community. And there was a fund created in, I'm going to say 2007, but it may have been a little earlier than that. And the Justice Gap Fund in California is a way that individual attorneys, through their annual licensing fees, payments, can support the Justice Gap Fund. It started with an opt-in suggested at $100 a year. And I think the most we ever got was like 5% of attorneys would opt in. And then beginning in about 2010, 2011, we added an opt out. And we've been playing with that number since its creation in 2010 or 11. And the idea is that most attorneys, they don't pay a lot of attention to the opt outs, but they do pay attention to the opt ins, and they may not opt in, especially if their law firm is paying for 100 attorneys at once. So we created an opt out where attorneys are able to opt out and not pay the suggested amount. It started, I think, at $10, then went to $20. It's now at $45. And most attorneys pay that amount. It's not a very large amount if you look at the full amount of our annual licensing fees. And that amount now, through the opt-ins and the opt-outs, depending on the year, is between like $5 to $8 million that goes to fund legal aid in our state. And recently, we carved out a little bit of that. First, for the PLLs, which I'll talk about in a second, we carved out $5 of that. We added $5 that were carved out for PLLs per active attorney who did not opt out. We've now changed that to $10. So if you are paying your own annual licensing fee as an attorney, you'll see this opt-out amount, and $10 of that actually goes to summer law students working in legal aid. And of that amount, we're projecting roughly $1.5 million will be able to fund summer law students, which not only will help them with their educational debt, but will allow them to have living expenses over the summer. Those funds will be administered by the state bar, as they have been in past years. So Justice Gap Fund is a way to allow individual attorneys to give into the system. Shriver projects, we talk about the Shriver projects all the time. Shriver projects were created by AB 590 in 2009. The funding started flowing, I think, in 2010, and I think the project started in 2011. And Shriver projects were named after Sergeant Shriver, who was Maria Shriver's father, who was very active in the legal aid community at the national level. So the Sergeant Shriver Civil Counsel Act, AB 590, funded these programs by creating a small post-judgment filing fee that was actually uncontroversial because the type of filing fee it was. And this now funds, depending on the year and the filings, we're probably at about $15 million a year for Shriver projects. And the purpose of Shriver projects is to measure what the intervention of a lawyer means. So the first evaluation of this report was literally over 600 pages long. And so it is looking, they did deep dives into court data, into case data, into client outcomes, to be able to show that the intervention of a legal aid lawyer made a difference, not only in kind of obvious things like housing stability. People were more likely to be housed 6 months later after an eviction if a lawyer had helped them, but other things like having more stable family arrangement, less custody modifications if a lawyer was involved. So Shriver Projects is an ongoing funding stream now, but it's shorthand for what was created by AB 590. PBE, another acronym, this is a portfolio bar exam. So you may have seen emails from LAAC staff talking about how we support the study of a portfolio bar exam here in California. A portfolio bar exam is an alternative pathway to licensure that does not require you to sit for a formal 2-day bar exam. It allows you to create instead, under the supervision of a licensed attorney who signs off that they're supervising you, a portfolio of specified work product that shows that you're competent to practice law. So we have been talking about PBE for the past year and a half. You'll see it in national news because other states have implemented a portfolio bar exam. And there's a lot of really great equity reasons to do so. A lot of people are having difficulty with in-person bar exams, and with the movement now to, and also technology challenges with the bar exam. And so there's a lot less stress or anxiety if you're able to show over a period of time you're able to kind of provisionally provide these services under the supervision of a lawyer to show that you're competent. And these three issues are all together. So triple LT and ALP. Triple LT is the limited licensed legal technician. ALP is allied legal professional. And those are terms that are used largely in other states for people who did not go to law school, did not pass a bar exam, but they're able to provide limited legal advice under very specific programs. The Triple LT program was in Washington. It's largely dormant now, but allied legal professionals are being talked about in other states, often in a very specific area, like helping victims of domestic violence navigate benefit systems or navigate the courts. and especially in rural parts of other states where there are no legal aid attorneys available. So you may, if you get Google alerts on these issues, you may see references to these allied legal professionals. In other states, they may call them paraprofessionals, but those are the two kind of words we see a lot. Here in California, you may have seen the email from legal aid communities, including LAAC, One Justice, Legal Link, or also from the Stanford Deborah Rohde Center on Ethics on community justice workers. That's a different model, but it's all part of the same conversation. So if you see community justice workers or CJW, they're kind of under that umbrella of people who did not go to law school, did not pass the bar exam, but they are able to provide legal advice under very specific and different by every state categories. PLL, I mentioned earlier, PLL, you may be a PLL. A PLL are provisionally licensed lawyers. In 2020, when it was very clear that we were not able to have a normal bar exam, the state bar and the legislature worked together on this idea of a provisionally licensed lawyer where they were able to provide legal services until a normal bar exam occurred under the supervision of an attorney who could kind of like vouch for them. And so it was a whole registration system. And the PLL program had two components. One were the people who just had not yet taken a bar exam because there hadn't been one offered. And then there was another component of the PLLs who had taken a bar exam recently. And I say had barely not passed because we had at the time also decreased the cut score, which increased the ability to pass a bar exam. And so there was a category of people who had just barely not passed the bar exam, but if they had taken it under the new cut score, they would have passed. So those PLLs were able to practice for a period of time. So you may hear PLL, it's kind of two components of that. CDBG, that's community development block grants. That's something that you'll hear about probably from someone on your team if you have a CDBG. And OAA, I mentioned earlier, is the Older Americans Act. It is a federal way of funding legal services to older Americans. I'm going to pause. Let me see what the next slide is. Yeah, let me pause before we go into how funding works, because that is the end of my acronym presentation, and I'm happy to take questions. And I can't figure out where the Q&A is. Jocelyn, if you see any questions, let me know. All right, none yet. Okay, if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the, okay, I see a hand raised. I don't know if I can unmute you. Do you want to put it in the Q&A? Let me see if I can unmute you. Okay, I can allow you to talk. Okay, you are unmuted, or you can unmute yourself. You're allowed to talk.
Well, the handout that you give us, tell us each of these things again, because it's much too fast to take notes if you don't know most of them.
Yes, I will give you a handout that has all of these things described and what the acronyms mean. And if anything has a link to something else, they will definitely be included in the handout. After this, we're going to share the PowerPoint presentation so you can see kind of the grouping of acronyms. And then we at LAAC have we call it the common acronyms chart that we share with new staff that I'm going to update to include all these other ones too.
Thank you.
Yeah, I know. It's a lot of acronyms. Any other questions? Okay. Then I'll move on to the next one, which is how funding works. Let me see if I can. Okay, Stephanie, I think that you may still your name may still be shown. I'm not sure how to take that away. So I want to talk a little bit about how funding works. And I'm focused largely on the IOLTA community. And I was trying to figure out like an infographic on this. I think the State Bar has developed one. When I do it with staff, I have to just like draw it out. But I'm going to explain it in a way that hopefully explains how the statute works. So IOLTA is statutorily created. The way that it works is by formula created in the statute. And there's a historical reason for that. When the IOLTA statute was passed, they wanted to make it be something that would be statewide and predictable. They did not want IOLTA to be discretionary grants that could be, a political whim. Let's fund this organization this year and this organization this year, because that would be very hard for organizations to be able to rely on funding year after year. So IOLTA is a formula. And so after the administrative cost, so put that aside, the state bar has administrative cost of administering the grants. IOLTA is distributed 15% off the top goes to those support centers. So if you're a support center, 15% of the entire IOLTA pot is divided equally between the support centers. It doesn't matter if you're a support center with 100 employees or 4 employees, it is equal. And the idea is that the system of support centers, they are all necessary to support the IOLTA Qualified Legal Services Project, the QLSP community. So 15% off the top goes to support centers. The remaining 85% is then divided by county. That is also in the statute. So every county gets a piece of that pot based on how many people live in the county who are low income, again, defined by statute. And the reason for that is that we need a minimum amount of funding per county, and that's unfortunately not built into the statute because IOLTA goes like this. But we need to be able to know that in counties where there are more people eligible for legal services, then there is more funding available. So, for example, Los Angeles County gets its fair share of IOLTA based on the number of people who are eligible based on income in Los Angeles County. Kern County, Sacramento County, Lake County, Alpine County, every county gets the share based on population. And so that part is as equitable as we can get in a formula. So that's the 85%. Within each county, we'll use Los Angeles County as the best example of this. Within each county, what they first do is see, again, defined by statute, if there is any organization that primarily provides their services through pro bono. And so if that is true, so in Los Angeles County, there are several organizations that the pro bono is the way that they are primarily providing services, they get a little bit off the top of that. So within a county, there's another, if there's a pro bono provider, then there's 10% off the county that goes to those pro bono providers. If there's just one, they get the 10%. If there's 10 of them, they share the 10%. So after, and if there's a pro bono allocation within the county, the remaining county dollars get distributed to every organization that provides services in the county, and it is not equally. In the statute, it says based on their qualified expenditures, which is kind of shorthand for budget for doing qualifying work. Sorry, I think you can hear my dog. So what that means is that larger organizations in a county will get more IOLTA dollars than smaller organizations in a county. And it's set up that way so it can be stable, and it's not, $20,000 for everyone in the county. It's really meant to sustain the system as it exists. So that is how IOLTA works. First, you take off support centers, then you divide in throughout the state by county, then you divide up within the county. So that's IOLTA. Equal Access Fund is also determined by statute how it's distributed. For Equal Access Fund, when it was created, Chief Justice Ron George really wanted to make it clear that the courts had a stake in access to justice as well. And so the courts get funding for what's called partnership grants. Partnership grants are, I think 15, oh, now I can't remember. It's either 10 or 15% off the top of Equal Access Fund. I'm going to say 10. I'm going to say 10% off the top of Equal Access Fund. And those are for partnerships between local legal aid providers and their courts. So some of you have partnership grants, and historically you had to have the partnership grant project in the court, in the courthouse. Now it can be remote, but the idea is to really incentivize the access to justice issues, get your court partners to work with you, and you can have those partnership grants. So after that 10% of Equal Access Fund partnership grants is taken off, the remainder goes exactly like IOLTA. So the remainder of that is the off the top for support centers, and then each county. So IOLTA and Equal Access Fund are largely by formula, and the idea is that it spreads throughout the state. It's efficient, it's fast, it's not competitive grants where it could be swayed by whatever is politically popular at the time. So that's how our core sources of state funding go. When we do advocacy to increase funding, we always focus on Equal Access Fund because that helps all programs in California. If that's not a politically popular message, or if there's another issue that our state legislators care a lot about, then we will advocate for more targeted funding. This includes things like the homelessness prevention grants that many of you got. It includes consumer debt legal services grants. It includes the innovation and infrastructure grants. We would love it to be equal access fund, but we also support other sources of funding when it seems like a legislative champion will really help us get that to the end of the budget process. Two other major funding streams in California, I mentioned earlier, we have 11 LSC funded organizations. It is statewide funding. So 11 organizations throughout our state receive funding from the Federal Legal Services Corporation. If you're curious about how that works, you can actually even Google like California LSC, and they have a whole page. I think they call it California by the numbers, and it shows the organizations here in California that receive that funding, how many people are helped by that funding, and a little bit more information about that. It's about 50 something million dollars right now that's flowing into California through federal LSC funds that, of course, we know under current politics is at risk of being dramatically cut, and this happens. The threat of cut happens frequently. One quick note on federal grants. There's two major paths of where the federal funding flows here in California. Either it's direct grants from federal agencies to, or federal agencies or LSC, because remember, LSC is not a federal agency. Direct grants from federal agencies or LSC to organizations, or it is federal funding that is allocated to our state's budget, then our state agencies will administer. So just reminding, like, you may receive federal funding, but it may be a state agency that's giving you that funding. Okay, and then that is the end of my formal presentation, right on time. I have open here of just like, what are your favorite acronyms? If you've heard acronyms, any that may be used in your work, in your practice area that I didn't use. I did not put some in here that some of us use, but do feel free to put in your favorite acronyms, and I'll share them on air.
It looks like we have a question in the chat.
Okay. Okay, hold on. Let's see. Within payments allocated to counties is the largest California qualified expenditures. Okay, so I'm going to read the question out loud and I can answer it. Within the IOLTA distribution within counties, is the largest category of qualified expenditures principally attorney salary expenses. So your qualified expenditures, for all of you, it is whatever you spend at your organization to help eligible clients. So what would not be qualifying expenditures would be things like non-legal services. It would be things like if you're serving people who are over income, like you're still doing it because maybe it's an agreement with your county, but you can't count that because they are not qualified expenditures because the clients aren't eligible clients. So those qualified expenditures largely are people. At least 75% have to be people. It doesn't have to be attorneys. It could be paid law students. It could be paralegals. It could be legal secretaries. It could be your intake staff. But at least 75% of that has to be personnel. And that's in the kind of grant guidance that you get from the state bar. I assume for most organizations, the majority is attorney salaries, but it's just has to be people, personnel costs. Another question is, can pro bono providers who receive the percentage off the top also obtain a fair share of the board funding that goes to legal services agencies? Let me reread that again. Can pro bono providers who receive the percentage off the top also obtain a fair share of the board funding? I'm not sure what you mean by board funding, but I'll answer a similar question, which may be what you're asking, is if you're a pro bono provider and you're getting a little bit off the top, you also get your share of the remaining county funds. And these are kind of historical reasons that if you get into the weeds of the history, a lot of the funding really wants us to activate the private bar community to do pro bono work. And so this is a little bit of an incentive to say, hey, if you're really activating the private bar to help people, here's a little extra money to do that. Also, if you're a pro bono allocation organization, you would know because your income threshold is different. For the majority of IOLTA organizations in California, the income threshold is 200% of the federal poverty level. If you're a pro bono provider that you get the pro bono allocation, I believe it's 75% of AMI. I did answer a question. Other questions or other favorite acronyms? And you know what I'll do is when we send materials from this, I'll try to dig up a good infographic, because I know I've seen one before that says like how the counties are divided. I just feel like it's so much easier to talk through because like this much off the top, and then this, and then this. And sometimes with an infographic, it's kind of hard to explain the process. But I'll see if I can find something when we send the follow-up email. Any other questions? Any other favorite acronyms? Okay, well, I'll stay on for another second in case I see any late breaking news of acronyms. But thank you for joining today. I know that it was very confusing because there's so many acronyms. You will get follow-up emails, but it's meant to just like start having the conversation about asking about acronyms, and then a little bit more of the background. So the next time you hear one of these acronyms, it won't be so new to you. So thank you everyone for joining, and I'll stay on for another minute.